damn chest. Slut from China. Street whore. You suck my dick, bitch. 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 Suck my slut. The whore from China. You cut that whole glass back with you. And you take the whole goddamn Chinese military, or the scientists, the government, kill all of that God's soul. Just as long as China can never be a threat to the United States of America. Any way, shape, form, or fashion. You get the picture. Slut from China. I'm gonna send you that coronavirus back good from China. Suck my slut. Suck my slut. Now fuck up and overlook this so I can dick up that bitch. Shit. See? That fucking pisses me off. Suck my slut. Man, I'm doing a shitty job developing my pieces. I need to watch Anna Crowley and how to press my damn chest. That can't play chess with it. Damn! Suck my slut. Don't even think about it! Suck my slut. You suck my dick, bitch. Don't even think about it. Oh my. Oh, nigger. Alright. What the hell? That's bullshit. God damn it. Jesus fucking Christ. Christ. Oh, fuck it. I think I'm fucking deal. Come on, you slant-eyed slut from China! Come on, you slant-eyed slut. Slant-eyed slut. Slut. Come on, you slut. Slut. You hooker. You prostitute. You harlot. You whore. China. You oriental prostitute. Come on, you oriental prostitute. That's wrong, goddamn this. Fucking Christ. Don't even think about it! Suck my slut. This shit. Bitch, you suck my dick, bitch. Bitch, you suck my dick, bitch. Bitch, suck my dick. You suck my dick, bitch. You suck my goddamn 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 dick. You suck my goddamn dick, bitch. You suck my goddamn dick, bitch. You suck my goddamn dick, bitch. You suck my goddamn dick. You suck my goddamn dick, bitch. You suck my goddamn dick, bitch. You suck my goddamn dick, bitch. You suck my goddamn dick. You suck my goddamn dick, bitch. You suck my goddamn dick, bitch. You suck my goddamn dick, bitch. You suck my goddamn dick. You suck my goddamn dick, bitch. 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 You suck my You suck my goddamn dick, bitch. You suck my goddamn dick, bitch. You suck my goddamn dick. You suck my goddamn dick, bitch. You suck. Stupid! Get your ass goodbye, slut. Suck my slut. Suck. Suck my slut! Man, this is real piss me off. God damn it. You suck my dick, bitch. Suck my motherfucking dick. You suck my motherfucking dick. Suck my dick. You suck my dick, bitch. Bitch, you suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. Suck my Suck my ass. Suck my ass. Suck my ass.
It's the exception that proves the rule. They are absorbed into Israel, not affirmed in their own cultural identity. It's not until thousands of years later where Paul reveals the great mystery that now Gentiles can be grafted into the family. But notice, Gentiles can be grafted into the family, the chosen people. It's not that Paul declares there shall no longer be chosen people. Paul doesn't destroy those ethnic boundaries. He reinforces them. The Israelites are still the chosen people, and Gentiles can now get in on that. And of course, there's debate between Paul and others about what it means to be grafted in. Do the Gentiles have to practice circumcision and adhere to the laws and all that? So again, the original framework of a chosen people with exclusive access to God and exclusive provisions from God are kept intact in the New Testament. It's just that Paul extends membership to outsiders who must become insiders once grafted in. Even today, there's still debate and disagreement on what that grafting in should look like. And the overall architecture of the New Testament still frames salvation through a distinctly Jewish Messiah, Jewish scripture, and a plan that begins and centers on Israel. So we saw ethnic bigotry and slavery in the Old Testament. And how did that manifest thousands of years later? Well, in America, pro-slavery theologians in the 18th and 19th century cited passages like Leviticus 25 to justify the enslavement of African people. They argued that if God permitted Israel to own foreign slaves, then slavery itself couldn't be inherently immoral. This wasn't fringe thinking. It was embedded in sermons and pamphlets and institutional doctrine across parts of the United States. Again, I know what I'm saying will stir debate, but we have the receipts. Slave traders and plantation owners across the American South, the Caribbean, and Brazil did not merely tolerate slavery, they theologized it. They pointed to the curse of Ham in Genesis 9, where Noah curses Canaan, Ham's son, saying, "The lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers." European settlers in the Americas identified themselves with Israel entering the promised land, equating indigenous populations to Canaanites, people groups who were obstacles to be removed. This sanctified displacement and violence. So now let's look at some common Christian objections to God's bigotry, and then I want to tie all this to religious trauma. The question to ask is, do these objections work? Do they overcome the harms we've just described? One of the most common Christian defenses is that chosenness was never about favoritism in the way we think of it. It was about function. Israel wasn't chosen because they were better than other nations, but because they were selected as a vehicle. The idea is that God picked one people group to eventually bless all people groups. Christians will point to Genesis 12:3, where God tells Abraham that all nations on earth will be blessed through you. And we're back to the scripture that we opened this video with. So the argument goes, this wasn't exclusion. It was a strategic starting point for a universal plan. Is it true that all nations are blessed through Israel, though? Well, Christians often say that by the time you get to the New Testament, the barriers between ethnic groups collapse. In Galatians 3:28, Paul writes that there is neither Jew nor Greek, for you are all one in Christ. That's about as direct a rejection of ethnic hierarchy as you can get, right? So the claim here is that whatever looks like tribalism early on is ultimately resolved through universal inclusivity. But remember all that grafted in stuff we already covered? It's not as pretty as this argument makes it sound. Just look at the rest of that verse. It says that there's neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female. Paul isn't calling for abolition in general, nor the abolition of gender roles and identity. So, is the Bible really saying that all ethnicities are truly blended into one through Jesus? Does that mean the Hebrew identity is absorbed into an ultimate generic human race such that its importance and historical significance dissolves?
Right.
I know many contemporary Christians believe that, but is that really what the text teaches? When you get to Revelation, the narrative is still about the nation of Israel triumphing over its enemies. We already mentioned the idea of progressive revelation, so we won't cover that again here. But some other common Christian defenses say that passages like Leviticus 19:34 instruct Israel to love the foreigner as yourself, explicitly grounding that command in their own history as strangers in Egypt. So while there are clear distinctions between Israel and other nations, there's also a parallel command not to exploit or dehumanize outsiders living among them. Well, our slavery passages and laws in Leviticus cannot overcome this. Then there's the inclusion through faith argument. Christians will often point out that non-Israelites were never categorically excluded from God. They were excluded from the covenant unless they joined it. Figures like Rahab and Ruth, again, weren't Israelites by birth, but they were fully incorporated into the community and even into the lineage of Jesus. The takeaway here is that identity wasn't ultimately about ethnicity. It was about allegiance and faith. Notice something here, though. The key issue is that biblical inclusion was usually conditional. Foreigners like Rahab and Ruth were welcomed in only after aligning themselves with Israel's God and people. Ruth says, "Your people shall be my people, and your God my God." That's Ruth 1:16, which is less of a celebration of multicultural inclusion than an act of covenantal assimilation. Likewise, Exodus 12:48 explicitly states that if a foreigner wanted to participate in a Passover, all his males must be circumcised. In other words, participation in the covenant community required adopting Israelite ritual identity markers. In Numbers 15, foreigners living among Israel were repeatedly told to obey the same law as native Israelites. Even resident aliens were expected to observe Sabbath laws, purity laws, and restrictions against idolatry. So while the Bible does contain pathways for non-Israelites to join the covenant community, those pathways generally required conformity to Israelite religion and practice. The outsider could be grafted in, but only by becoming functionally Israelite in worship, law, and communal allegiance. And finally, many Christians push back on the idea that later abuses like American slavery, apartheid, colonial violence were distortions. The same Bible that was used to justify oppression was also used by abolitionists, civil rights leaders, and reformers to argue for equality and human dignity. So from this perspective, the problem isn't the source material. It's how selectively and self-servingly people have interpreted it. But I think we can make the case from a neutral perspective that the Bible can and has been used to justify social atrocities such as slavery and cultural genocide through bigotry. Just because you can use the Bible to make a positive case does not nullify the ability to make a clear negative one. The revealed truth of an all-powerful, all-loving, perfect God should never have the ability to do this. That it has and can is a problem. So we've looked at some high-level social and moral issues here, but now let's zoom in and talk about biblical bigotry at the personal level. And this is where Christianity takes another blow. This is where the personal trauma erupts from the narrative. When I was a fundamentalist Christian, one of the Christians who believed they had everything right while others had it wrong, we were told that Catholics were deceived and in error. They were following a false gospel. Pastors preached about it from the pulpit. I remember feeling prejudiced toward Catholics as a result. I remember mentally condemning them. And I'm not alone. You'll hear other Reformed Christians say the same thing. And you'll also hear those who have deconverted from Christianity say it as well. Okay, I promised we'd talk about how all this led me to a fear of heaven. And a quick caveat. You can think I'm nuts for thinking what I'm about to share. That's fine. But an irrational Bible will create irrational fears and delusions in certain minds. In 2011, during the 2 weeks while I awaited my official neuromuscular disease diagnosis, and that's a story I tell in other videos, I believed my doctors had told me I had ALS without telling me I had ALS, but I still had more tests to do to be sure. Nonetheless, I believed I had ALS and that I would maybe have 3-ish years left to live, if that. I believed I was facing my mortality before 40. This caused me to focus on heaven more than ever. I believed I was going there, but my melancholic OCD mind couldn't quite grasp it, and now I was forced to really contend with it. I knew what the Bible said about it, and I prayed and prayed that God would help me to understand it more, because now that I was facing my mortality, I had to be honest with God. I was afraid of heaven. I was afraid to die, and I wasn't sure why, and I was ashamed to admit it. No Christian should fear heaven. I mean, that's ridiculous. So I did what all good melancholic OCD thinkers do. I ruminated on my fear to try to resolve it. I explored it from every possible angle. I remember sitting in my bathroom in the middle of the night behind closed doors in the blackness, staring out a window at the night sky, sobbing uncontrollably with fear, thinking that, you ready? I was a Gentile. that I wasn't Jewish and I didn't speak Hebrew, and thus I wouldn't be entirely welcome or fit in heaven. Not only that, not once in the Bible did the Hebrew customs, rituals, and celebrations ever really appeal or make much sense to me. In fact, they struck me as odd, as did so many of the ancient Hebrew laws: circumcision, stoning people, mixed fabrics. I'll leave it at that. I knew the laws and rituals, and I studied them as a fundamentalist Christian. I regarded them as contextually important to understand Yahweh and biblical history, and I had Jewish friends who celebrated all the major holidays, so I believed they had some special kind of privilege that I didn't have, but it all still felt so foreign to me, and I felt guilty and ashamed for thinking that because God placed such a heavy weight and importance on it. I mean, after all, Jesus came from a Jewish lineage. I grew up in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, a product of a public education and a middle-class Gentile family. I knew nothing about Israel, the Middle East, nor ancient Hebrew customs and culture beyond what the Bible talked about, and I couldn't get past this idea that Yahweh and Jesus, both Jews, made heaven a place of Hebrew culture, tradition, and language. Heaven favored Hebrew ethnicity and seemed to devalue other cultures like mine. There's evidence in Scripture to support this, especially in Matthew, around the feasts in heaven. Being a Gentile, even though Gentiles are grafted into the family of believers, I believed I was still deficient somehow, a second-class citizen, because the scriptural promises are first for the Jew, then for the Gentile, as we read in Romans 1:16. Yes, I know that plenty of passages in the New Testament seem to equate Jews and Gentiles, but this wasn't always the case. And yes, I know parts of the Bible are Greek and Aramaic, so it's not all Hebrew, but even the Greek and Aramaic parts still tell the Hebrew story. And there's obviously nothing wrong with Hebrew culture. I'm not anti-Semitic. It just wasn't something I knew or could relate to. And so for me, heaven would be culture shock and a place to which I would have to assimilate into a culture, customs, and traditions I would know little about and wasn't really interested in, which again made me, a Gentile, ashamed and feel guilty that I didn't love and embrace all things Hebrew, and that the thought of spending an eternity in Jewish culture didn't really excite me, just like it may not excite a Hebrew from 4,000 years ago to spend an eternity in a contemporary American culture, if that's how he had to imagine it. But assuming it's a Hebrew culture in heaven, I supposed I could have grown into it over time and learned to love it, and I suppose that God could have helped me along with this. But from this side of heaven, with my very limited human imagination, I simply couldn't get excited about it. Is heaven a distinctly Hebrew culture? Is there a single human culture in heaven? I mean, who knows? Before you dismiss my thoughts on this as ridiculous, remember the purpose of my videos, which is to demonstrate how the Bible causes trauma for minds that work like mine. And there are plenty out there, millions and millions. And the trauma was less about wrestling with heaven as a distinctly Hebrew culture, and more about the shame and guilt I felt for believing I wouldn't fit in and wasn't all that excited about it. And the fear I had knowing God knew how I was feeling and thinking about all this, which only made him more angry with me. I mean, we see in the Bible how angry he gets with people who don't value his chosen people and what they believe and value. So let's wrap this up. In America, when you become a Christian, whether you proclaim it this way or not, you are adopted into a family. You are now part of a community, a people group, a club. You believe you've become part of a people group that loves everybody, values equal rights for everybody, and values everybody equally. You become justified and sanctified as benefits of exclusive club membership. But what you tend to overlook or simply not notice is that you've become part of an exclusive in-group that now feels not only justified but perhaps even obligated to judge the out-group. I see it all the time in my comments. I am deceived, I'm blind, I'm wayward, I'm hellbound. This is the type of in-group, out-group thinking. You're either part of the club or you're not. You're either for or against these false dichotomies and dualities Christianity created. And the worst part is that I wanted to be a part of the club, and I believed I was a part of the club. Yet Christians can only defend their faith by saying now that I was never part of the club to begin with. Think about how that is not only offensive, but extremely discriminatory and bigoted. And I can say this because I was a Christian for 25 years and I operated within Christian networks and social circles. But think about how Christianity connects you immediately with other Christians who you believe are like-minded and share similar beliefs. This is exactly what to be part of a bigoted or prejudiced community does to someone. It affirms their adoption and membership into an elite group with specific shared beliefs that are right while everyone else is wrong. I don't want to come down too hard on Christianity, though, because we're social creatures. This is what we instinctively have evolved to do, because we recognize the value in cooperative societies and shared beliefs. There's protection in that. There's flourishing in that. There's safety in that. There's comfort in that. There's community in that. So there's benefit to being part of a club, so to speak. But what happens when that club makes you believe that you are favored and others not in the club are either exiled, ostracized, or not favored or not chosen, or even worse, you believe they're explicitly rebelling against the values of your club, so they become enemies. They deserve punishment. I want to be absolutely clear about something. I'm not saying every person who reads the Bible and is a Christian is a bigot. I've known some wonderful Christians. My wife is one. She's still a firm fundamentalist believer, though sadly I know she feels that I'm now part of the out-group. It's a conversation we've learned to stop having. But I am saying this. The Bible contains material that has been used repeatedly and consistently throughout history to justify the domination, enslavement, and extermination of people based on ethnicity, and that material is not buried in obscure footnotes in the Bible. It is in Leviticus, it's in Deuteronomy, it's in Genesis. It is the foundational architecture of the tradition. If Yahweh is who the Bible claims he is, omniscient, omnipotent, the author of moral truth, then he knew what those passages would be used to do. He knew where they would lead flawed and infallible people. He had the power to say something different. He didn't. And finally, our last couple of videos have brought up this idea of religious trauma being the result of being exposed to bad teaching versus what the Bible has to say. This is yet another form of discrimination, because what Christians are saying is, if you only had my mind or my eyes or my teaching, then religious trauma would have never happened to you. Well, once again, Christians are claiming an exclusive club of understanding. That's a form of Gnosticism. That's discriminatory. That's short-sighted. That overlooks a lot of other things that we talk about on this channel, like mental temperaments and cognitive filters and things like that. I've been kicked out of the club, excommunicated, unwelcomed, banished, no chance of ever getting back in. And that can feel worse than having never belonged to the club in the first place. The other thing about Christian exclusivity and what can lead to dogmatic bigotry and ethnocentrism is Jesus claiming he is the only way, he is the only path, he is the only light, and every other way is false. Christians don't stop to think about what that really means. They feel privileged to have found the only way, and they think they're on the right side of life and that every other way or every other path or God or religion is wrong and false. They feel chosen, and that's not only powerful, it's dangerous. And at the end of the day, I can still hear Christians saying, so what? It's God's prerogative. If he wants a chosen people through which to reveal himself and from which comes the Messiah, who are you to question God's motives and plan, HG? And I get that. But on my channel, we always try to bring this back to a person's lived experience and their mental temperament and their cognitive filters. When you've been physically and sexually abused as a child, or you've gone through other traumatic childhood experiences, trauma can make you feel like an outcast or ostracized or exiled in some way. It can make you feel as though you don't belong in the normal pockets of society. It can make you feel like you are constantly being targeted and rejected by others. And that's the thing. Christians keep saying, I've rejected God. While it's true that I now don't believe in the Christian God, nor do I believe he can exist as described, and if he did, he's evil, I'm where I'm at now because for 5 to 6 years of severe religious trauma, I believed he was rejecting me. He had kicked me out of the club, banished me. I hope you guys hear what I'm saying here. Religious trauma doesn't begin with you rejecting God. It begins with the belief that God's rejecting you, that you were either never grafted in or that he's cut you out. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this. Can anybody relate? Did God having a chosen people ever lead you to think he's a bigot? Or did it ever make you feel less than? Well, not with Jesus, HG, even though Jesus said he came to save the lost sheep of Israel. Appreciate you guys being here. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do so that this content reaches more people to help. And real quick, the best way to support the channel financially, if you can and want to do that, is to pick up your copy of On Monsters and Phantoms off of Amazon. It's my memoir about severe religious trauma and deconversion from Christianity, and leave a review. It's a raw and honest look into the diabolically harmful mind games that Christianity plays with us. Let me know via email that you bought it so I can thank you in a future video. I've got tons of reader reviews on onmonstersandphantoms.com. So I'll see you again Wednesday, where we'll look at some data around the prevalence of religious trauma, and we'll talk about that. And until next time, let's continue to catalyze a conversation together about religious trauma to let those who suffer from it know that there's real hope, and to let those who dismiss it know that it's real.
Suck my motherfucking dick. You suck my motherfucking cunt. Oh, you abandoned the games. Guess what? I'm gonna report your goddamn black ass for stalling. Boy, I done abandoned in the motherfucking game. So, bitch. Suck my motherfucking dick. Suck my motherfucking dick. Suck my dick, bitch.
There is a sentence in the Gospel of Mark that most people who have read the Bible their entire lives have passed over without stopping. Mark chapter 9, verse 1. Jesus is speaking to a crowd. He says this, "Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see that the kingdom of God has come with power." Some who are standing here, not a future generation, not a metaphor. People in that crowd, people with names, people who were already old when he said it. Every single one of them died. And that fact, depending entirely on how you read 4 Greek words, is either one of the most difficult sentences in the New Testament, or completely beside the point. That sentence has been sitting in the text for nearly 2,000 years. Theologians have written thousands of pages explaining what Jesus actually meant. Scholars have built entire careers around the question of whether that sentence means what it appears to mean. This video does not tell you what Jesus meant. It does something more specific. It places 8 cases before you, 8 sayings and traditions attributed to Jesus, or preserved by the earliest Christian texts. And it asks a question the tradition has never fully agreed on how to answer. Not whether Jesus was right, whether the conversation about that question has been honest. Picture a room with 3 doors. Behind the first door is a historian. She has spent her career applying the same methods to ancient texts that any serious historian would apply to any ancient source.
This is a female because she's cute.
Has been honest. Picture a room with 3 doors. Behind the first door is a historian. She has spent her career applying the same methods to ancient texts that any serious historian would apply to any ancient source. She asks, what can be verified? What fits the known world of 1st century Galilee and Judea? What survives the tests that historians use when the person they are studying has been dead for 2,000 years? She is not hostile to the texts. She is doing the most serious thing you can do with them, reading them carefully, with full awareness of where they came from and what they were built to accomplish. Behind the second door is a theologian. He has spent his career thinking about what Jesus means for people who are alive right now, people who pray, people who grieve, people trying to understand what their lives are for. His Jesus is not primarily a figure to be reconstructed from ancient sources. He is a presence, a relationship, something that has shaped the lives of billions of people across 20 centuries in ways that no historical reconstruction can fully account for. Behind the third door is a literary scholar. She reads the Gospels the way she would read any document produced by a community under pressure, shaped by what that community needed. Carrying the marks of multiple hands and multiple moments, she is not looking for fraud. She is looking for the human process by which something important gets written down, carried forward, and changed in the carrying. All 3 of them are reading the same words on the same page. None of them are reading the same thing. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is what happens when people stand at different doors without knowing which door they are at. And most arguments about these texts produce more heat than light for exactly that reason. People are describing different rooms and calling it a disagreement about the furniture. The 8 cases in this video live at the intersection of all 3 doors. This video works primarily from the historian's door and the literary scholar's door.
God damn it.
But the theologian's door cannot be closed without distorting the picture. A historian who ignores the theological weight of these texts will miss why they have mattered so much to so many people for so long. A literary scholar who ignores both will produce something technically precise and humanly tone-deaf. All three doors stay open. That is the only honest way to do this. Now, a distinction that most people who grew up in religious communities were never given. A distinction that changes everything about how these 8 cases can be read fairly. When scholars talk about Jesus, they are not always talking about the same Jesus. There are at least 3 different Jesuses in the academic conversation, and confusing them is how the most important questions get lost before they can be properly asked. The first is what scholars call the historical Jesus. This is the figure that historians try to reconstruct using the tools of their discipline. What is the earliest evidence? What fits the known world? What passes the criteria historians use to evaluate ancient testimony? This Jesus is always partial, always contested, always a reconstruction built from incomplete material. The tools of history cannot give you direct access to a person who lived 2,000 years ago. What they can give you is a best estimate, argued carefully, held with appropriate uncertainty. The second is the Christ of faith. This is Jesus, as billions of people have encountered him across 20 centuries of lived religious experience, as the object of prayer and worship, as the presence that people report meeting in moments of crisis and transformation. The Christ of faith is not accessible through historical methods. He is accessible through relationship, through community, through the long accumulated testimony of people whose lives were changed by what they believed. Historical methods cannot verify or falsify this Jesus. They are simply not the right instrument for that question. The third is the gospel tradition. This is Jesus, as he appears in the specific texts that have come down to us, shaped by the communities that produced those texts. The Gospels are not raw footage. They are edited documents, produced by specific people, for specific audiences, addressing specific concerns. They carry the marks of the communities that made them. Understanding those marks is not a threat to the texts. It is what allows you to read them honestly, rather than projecting onto them things they were never trying to say. Here is why this matters for everything that follows. When someone says, Jesus predicted the end of the world and was wrong, they are making a claim about the historical Jesus. When someone responds that the resurrection changes everything, they are talking about the Christ of faith. Neither person is addressing what the other actually said. They are at different doors, describing different rooms, and calling it a debate. The 8 cases in this video live primarily at the level of the gospel tradition and the historical Jesus. They ask what these texts appear to say, where they came from, and how the communities that received them have handled the distance between what the texts appear to say and what history appears to show. Knowing that before the first case begins is the difference between following the argument and being lost inside it. One more thing. Non-negotiable, if this video is going to be honest. The world Jesus was speaking into was saturated with a very specific kind of language. A language that most people in the 21st century have never learned to read without understanding it, at least roughly. Almost every case in this video is impossible to evaluate fairly. That language is called apocalyptic literature, and it has almost nothing to do with the word apocalyptic as it is used today. When most people today hear the word apocalyptic, they picture catastrophe, the end of civilization, literal fire from the sky. That is not what the word meant in first century Jewish thought, and it is not what the literature of that tradition was doing. Apocalyptic literature in the Jewish tradition. Texts like the book of Daniel, the book of Ezekiel, and a body of writing scholars call First Enoch, was using a highly developed symbolic vocabulary to talk about historical crisis, divine judgment, and the vindication of God's people. When those texts described the sun going dark and the stars falling from the sky, they were not making predictions about astronomy. They were using inherited imagery to give cosmic weight to historical events, to say, in the vocabulary available to them, the structure of the world is being reorganized at the level that actually matters. The prophet Isaiah used this language to describe the fall of Babylon. The sun darkened, the moon failed, the stars fell, Babylon fell. Nobody stood outside waiting for the stars to physically drop. The imagery was doing something different. It was saying this event has the weight of a world ending, because for the people living through it, it did. Jesus was formed by that tradition. He used that language. He spoke to people who knew it from childhood. When he reached for images of the Son of Man coming on clouds, he was reaching into a vocabulary his audience already understood, bending it toward his own purposes, using it the way the tradition had taught people to use it for generations before him. Whether he was using it the way the tradition had always used it, or doing something genuinely new with it, is part of what the 8 cases in this video are about. 3 scholars now, not as appeal to authority. As the actual shape of the conversation, Albert Schweitzer did not invent the questions he made famous. A theologian named Johannes Weiss had asked a version of them before him. But when Schweitzer published his book in 1906, he made those questions unavoidable. His argument was that Jesus was a genuinely apocalyptic figure who believed the end of the age was arriving in his own lifetime, who organized his entire ministry around that expectation, and who died, in Schweitzer's reading, still waiting for the transformation that never came. Schweitzer did not think this made Jesus fraudulent. He thought it made Jesus human in the most honest sense of the word. And he thought that many public forms of the tradition built on that figure had often chosen not to say so plainly. Nicholas Thomas Wright spent nearly 900 pages in 1996 responding to Schweitzer. His argument began not with conclusions but with language. Schweitzer was reading first-century Jewish apocalyptic imagery, the way a 21st-century reader reads a weather forecast. Literally, as though the sun darkening and the stars falling and the Son of Man coming on clouds were predictions about things that would be physically observable. That is not how this language works. It never was. Wright's Jesus was using the symbolic vocabulary of his tradition to describe specific historical events. Above all, the destruction of Jerusalem and the Temple in the year 70 of the Common Era. That destruction was the fulfillment the language was pointing toward. Raymond Brown and John Meyer arrived at a third position. Both had spent decades with these texts. Both were more cautious about certainty than either Schweitzer or Wright. Their shared argument was this: the texts we are reading are not raw transcripts. They are the products of communities that received traditions about Jesus, shaped them in light of their own experiences and needs, and passed them forward in the forms that served their communities best. The question of what Jesus actually said is almost always more complicated than either side of the debate is willing to admit. 3 positions, 3 costs, no exit that does not require paying one of them. One last thing before the first case. A theological interpretation is not automatically dishonest. The tradition has always interpreted its own texts. That is not weakness. That is what living traditions do. Communities receive texts. Read them in light of their own moment. Find ways to hold them. Pass them forward. The question this video keeps returning to is not whether an interpretation has been offered. Interpretations are always offered. The question is whether the interpretation is presented as an interpretation or as the only meaning any careful reader could ever find. A tradition that has inherited its readings so deeply that the choices behind them are no longer visible is not necessarily deceiving anyone. It may simply be a tradition that has forgotten what it looked like to read these words for the first time. That forgetting has a cost. It falls most heavily on the people who trusted the tradition enough to never ask what else the words might say. 8 cases, starting now. There is a reason this video opened with Mark chapter 9, verse 1. Not because it is the most dramatic saying in this list. Not because it is the hardest to explain. But because it is the clearest example of something the tradition has spent nearly 2,000 years doing with a text that creates real tension, not hiding it, framing it, giving it a reading that allows it to sit inside the tradition without cracking the tradition open. The sentence, "Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see that the kingdom of God has come with power." Not a parable marked as parable. Not a vision clearly framed as symbolic. A direct statement, attributed to Jesus, addressed to specific people standing in front of him. Some of you. Not all of you. Some. The phrasing implies that others in that crowd would die before the fulfillment came, but some would live to see it. The saying appears in Mark chapter 9, verse 1. Matthew chapter 16, verse 28. Luke chapter 9, verse 27. All 3 synoptic gospels carry it. That weight needs to be understood carefully. Matthew and Luke almost certainly drew from Mark or from a shared tradition between them. This is not 3 independent witnesses at 3 different locations. It is a tradition strong enough to survive the editorial decisions of all 3 writers. That is its weight. Persistence. Not independence. Now 4 serious readings. Each one carries real support. Each one costs something. Naming the cost of each is not an attack on any of them. It is the most honest thing that can be said about them. The first reading connects the fulfillment to the transfiguration. Mark chapter 9. Verse 1 sits immediately before the transfiguration in verses 2 through 8. 6 days later, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up a mountain. They see him transformed, his clothes dazzling white. Moses and Elijah beside him. A voice from a cloud declaring who he is. The argument is that some standing here are those 3 disciples. And the kingdom of God, come with power, is that moment of divine visibility on the mountain. This reading has centuries behind it, and serious people behind those centuries. Its cost is a question of scale. Some who are standing here will not taste death is a strange way to introduce something that happens 6 days later to 3 people already present in the conversation. The urgency of the phrase implies a meaningful interval, not a week. And calling a private vision on a hillside, the kingdom of God coming with power, requires those words to carry considerably less than they seem to carry in their wider context. The second reading connects the fulfillment to the resurrection and Pentecost. The kingdom came with power when Jesus rose from the dead and when the Spirit arrived at Pentecost, both within the lifetime of everyone in that crowd. This reading has genuine theological coherence. Its cost is quieter, but real.
Stupid motherfucker.
If the fulfillment was always arriving within weeks or months,
Stupid!
you do not need to tell people that some of them will survive to see it. The phrase "will not taste death" implies a real possibility of death before the moment comes. A fulfillment arriving in 50 days does not need that kind of frame around it. The third reading belongs most closely to Nicholas Thomas Wright. The destruction of Jerusalem and the Temple in the year 70 of the Common Era is the fulfillment. People standing in that Galilean crowd in the early 1st century did live to see that event 40 years later. Wright reads all of Jesus' apocalyptic language through the lens of the Hebrew prophets, where cosmic imagery describes earthly events of enormous historical consequence, not literal astronomical occurrences. The language of the kingdom coming with power is the language of historical vindication. This reading is serious and carefully argued. Its cost requires sitting with carefully. If Wright is right, the central announcement of Jesus, the kingdom of God coming with power, refers to a military siege and catastrophe 70 miles away that would unfold 4 decades after he spoke those words. That is a coherent reading. It is also a reading that produces a Jesus whose most public proclamation meant something very different from what most people who have ever heard those words in a church understood them to mean. Both things can be true at once, but they are not the same thing. And presenting one as the obvious reading while the other goes unmentioned is not giving the full picture. The fourth reading is Schweitzer's, and it is the one that carries the most direct cost for the tradition. In Schweitzer's reading, Jesus meant what the words most naturally say. Some of the people in front of him would live to see the kingdom arrive in a form no one could miss. He believed it. He built his ministry around it. He staked everything on it. And it did not happen in the form he described. Schweitzer did not read this as making Jesus a liar. He read it as making Jesus human, fully, uncomfortably, recognizably human, a person of extraordinary moral vision, operating inside a historical expectation that history did not confirm, and whose vision, Schweitzer believed, survived the failure of the expectation precisely because the vision was larger than any timeline. Now, something that tends to stay in footnotes, but belongs in the open. By the 3rd and 4th centuries, major Christian interpreters were already working with this sentence. Origen reached for allegory. Chrysostom connected it to the Transfiguration. The specific solutions matter less than what they reveal. These were careful, serious readers living centuries before modern biblical criticism existed, and they felt the pressure of this sentence strongly enough to need an answer. The discomfort with Mark, chapter 9, verse 1, was not invented by skeptics in the 19th century. It was already there, felt by the people who knew these texts best, nearly from the beginning. Here is the thing about all 4 readings that deserves to be said without softening it. None of them is obviously right. None of them is obviously dishonest. Each represents a genuine attempt by serious people to hold a text that creates real tension. The question is not which reading a person chooses. Every careful reader eventually chooses one. The question is whether they acknowledge that they are choosing, whether they name the cost of what they are holding, whether they present their reading as one serious option among several, or as the only meaning any fair-minded reader could find in the words, a tradition that has inherited its readings so deeply that the choices behind them are no longer visible, is not a tradition that is lying. It is a tradition that has forgotten what it looked like to encounter these words without already knowing what they were supposed to mean. That forgetting has consequences. For the people who trusted the tradition enough to never ask the question, the sentence is still there. Every single person in that crowd eventually died. What you do with that fact is a reading. What you do with the reading is yours. This case is about something smaller than a sentence. 4 letters in Greek. A word you pass in a breath when you read it aloud. A word that, in its most common usage across the New Testament itself, has a clear and ordinary meaning. A word that has generated more sustained interpretive effort than almost anything else in these texts. Not because it is obscure, because of what happens when you let it mean what it most commonly means. The word is genia. It appears in Mark chapter 13, verse 30. Matthew chapter 24, verse 34. Luke chapter 21, verse 32.
God damn it.
In all three synoptic Gospels, the same statement closes a long and dramatic discourse. Truly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. To understand why that word carries the weight it does, you need to know what it is closing. Mark chapter 13 is called the Olivet Discourse. Jesus is sitting on the Mount of Olives, directly across the valley from the temple. His disciples have just remarked on how extraordinary the temple is. He has responded by saying, "Not one stone will be left on another." They ask when and how. What follows is the longest continuous speech of Jesus in the entire Gospel of Mark. Wars and rumors of wars, nations rising against nations, earthquakes and famines, the desecration of the temple, persecution, the sun going dark, the moon failing to give its light, stars falling from the sky, the Son of Man coming on clouds with great power and glory, sending angels to gather the chosen from the four winds. Then, after all of that, he says this: this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. The structure of the passage is the first problem for any reading that wants to locate the fulfillment far in the future. Jesus has just described a sequence ending with the Son of Man arriving with cosmic power. He then says the people currently alive will see all of it. The natural reading, inside the passage's own logic, is that everything described in the previous verses will happen before the generation in front of him has died. Now, genia, in ordinary Greek usage of the first century, genea most commonly meant a generation of people. The people alive at a given time. The word appears in this sense throughout the Gospels. In Matthew chapter 23, verse 36, Jesus says all these things will come upon this generation, referring to the people he is speaking to. In Matthew chapter 12, verse 45, this evil generation refers to contemporary people. In Luke chapter 11, verse 50, this generation is the current population. The consistent pattern across the same body of literature points toward one dominant meaning in its most natural form. But three alternative readings have developed. Each deserves honest presentation. The first alternative takes genia to mean race or ethnic group, specifically the Jewish people. Jesus is saying the Jewish people as a distinct people will not disappear before these things occur. This has something going for it historically. The Jewish people have survived 2,000 years of pressure that destroyed many other peoples. A prediction of their survival carried real weight in a world where that survival was genuinely uncertain. Its cost is linguistic. While genea can carry a broader ethnic meaning in some Greek contexts, that is not the dominant sense in the New Testament passages where the word appears, and it is not the sense most naturally suggested by this context. Choosing this reading in Mark 13 requires departing from the word's most consistent usage in the surrounding literature, and doing so specifically in the verse where the most common meaning creates the most difficulty. The second alternative takes genea to mean a type of people, a wicked or faithless category of human being. This generation means something like this kind of person will always exist until the end. On this reading, the saying is a moral observation, not a timeline. Its cost is more significant. This meaning of genea is not clearly attested anywhere else in the New Testament. It is a meaning constructed almost entirely in response to this one passage. When a word is assigned a definition, it carries nowhere else in the same body of literature. And when that definition is assigned specifically in the one place where the common meaning creates difficulty, the explanation is doing very heavy lifting indeed. The third alternative is rights. He accepts the most natural meaning of genia. the generation currently alive, but relocates the fulfillment to the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in the year 70 of the Common Era. People who heard Jesus in the early 1st century did live to see that event. The generation passed without passing away, and before it did, the events Jesus described, understood through the lens of symbolic, apocalyptic language, unfolded in history. This is the most intellectually honest of the alternatives in one important respect. It does not require genia to mean something it does not normally mean, but its cost lies in a different direction. It requires the entire Olivet Discourse, including the coming of the Son of Man on clouds with great power and glory, to be read as symbolic language for a military siege and the fall of a city. That reading is not incoherent. It transforms what the passage has meant to most Christians across most of history. And it requires applying that transformation with complete consistency, not only in the passages where the pressure is but 3 alternative readings have developed. Each deserves honest presentation. The first alternative takes genia to mean race or ethnic group, specifically the Jewish people. Jesus is saying the Jewish people as a distinct people will not disappear before these things occur. This has something going for it historically. The Jewish people have survived 2,000 years of pressure that destroyed many other peoples. A prediction of their survival carried real weight in a world where that survival was genuinely uncertain. Its cost is linguistic. While Genea can carry a broader ethnic meaning in some Greek contexts, that is not the dominant sense in the New Testament passages where the word appears, and it is not the sense most naturally suggested by this context. Choosing this reading in Mark 13 requires departing from the word's most consistent usage in the surrounding literature, and doing so specifically in the verse where the most common meaning creates the most difficulty. The second alternative takes Genea to mean a type of people, a wicked or faithless category of human being. This generation means something like this kind of person will always exist until the end. On this reading, the saying is a moral observation, not a timeline. Its cost is more significant. This meaning of Genea is not clearly attested anywhere else in the New Testament. It is a meaning constructed almost entirely in response to this one passage. When a word is assigned a definition, it carries nowhere else in the same body of literature. And when that definition is assigned specifically in the one place where the common meaning creates difficulty, the explanation is doing very heavy lifting indeed. The third alternative is rights. He accepts the most natural meaning of Genea, the generation currently alive, but relocates the fulfillment to the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in the year 70 of the Common Era. People who heard Jesus in the early 1st century did live to see that event. The generation passed without passing away, and before it did, the events Jesus described, understood through the lens of symbolic, apocalyptic language, unfolded in history. This is the most intellectually honest of the alternatives in one important respect. It does not require Genea to mean something it does not normally mean, but its cost lies in a different direction. It requires the entire Olivet Discourse, including the coming of the Son of Man on clouds with great power and glory, to be read as symbolic language for a military siege and the fall of a city. That reading is not incoherent. It transforms what the passage has meant to most Christians across most of history, and it requires applying that transformation with complete consistency, not only in the passages where the pressure is highest. Now, here is the thing about these multiple readings that tends to get overlooked in the debate about which one is correct. The debate itself is the data, a word that most commonly means the generation currently alive has generated centuries of sustained interpretive effort to find somewhere else to point. That effort is documented. It is in the record. It was felt by Origen in the 3rd century, by Chrysostom in the 4th, by every serious reader across the centuries since, who slowed down long enough to feel what the passage was doing. The existence of multiple readings does not prove the text is hopelessly obscure. Every ancient text generates multiple readings. What the multiplicity here shows is that the most natural reading of Genia, in the context where it appears, creates enough pressure that interpreters have repeatedly looked for an alternative. And the looking itself, the fact that serious readers across serious centuries have consistently felt the need to look, is evidence of something real about the text, not a verdict. An observation about what this word has done to the people who read it carefully across a very long time. Genea is 4 letters. The conversation it has generated fills libraries. The word is still there. So is the conversation. This is where the tradition gets to make its strongest case. Not every saying in this video sits in the same position as the previous 2. Some of them point toward things that actually happened, and the honest version of this conversation has to take that with the same seriousness it brings to everything else. Mark chapter 13, verse 2. Jesus has just walked out of the temple. His disciples are still talking about the scale of it, the massive stones, the grandeur of the construction. Jesus says this, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down." In the year 70 of the Common Era, the Roman general Titus laid siege to Jerusalem. The city fell after months of warfare. The temple was destroyed. The priesthood that had served it ceased to function as an institution. The sacrificial system that had defined Jewish worship for centuries came to an end. The historian Josephus described the scale of the destruction with a detail and grief that makes it impossible to minimize. On its face, this is a fulfilled prophecy. Jesus said the temple would be destroyed. The temple was destroyed. The tradition has pointed to this connection for 2,000 years. And the connection is real. It deserves to be named clearly before anything else is said about it. 2 things complicate the picture. Neither one is a footnote. The first is the question of when Mark was written. The dominant position in critical scholarship is that the Gospel of Mark, at least in its final form, was composed around or after the year 70 of the Common Era. The reasoning draws on multiple factors: the tone and urgency of the Gospel as a whole, the specific framing of the temple discourse, the level of detail in how destruction is described. Scholars like Marcus Borg and John Dominic Crossan have argued that the temple prophecy reflects knowledge of events that had already occurred, not anticipation of events yet to come. There is a name for this practice in the study of ancient literature: vaticinium ex eventu, prophecy from the event, writing a prediction after the fact, in the voice of a figure who lived before the event. Was a recognized practice in the Jewish apocalyptic tradition. It was not considered dishonest in its cultural context. It was a literary form with its own purposes, a way of saying that what happened was not random, that it carried divine meaning, that the pattern was present in it all along. The book of Daniel itself, which Jesus drew on heavily, is understood by many critical scholars to have been composed in the 2nd century before the Common Era, describing the Maccabean crisis in the language of prophecy. Richard Bauckham and others have argued that the tradition behind the temple's saying may reflect an authentic early source, that Jesus may have genuinely anticipated the temple's destruction given the political tensions of his time. That argument deserves to be heard alongside the dominant critical position. The point is not that one side has settled the question. The point is that the fulfillment the tradition most confidently claims is also the fulfillment most entangled in a dating question. The tradition has not always presented clearly. The second complication involves what is still standing. The Western Wall has been standing for 2,000 years. It draws millions of visitors to Jerusalem every year. It is one of the most recognizable structures on earth. Here is what needs to be said carefully. The Western Wall is not the temple building itself. It is part of the retaining wall system that Herod the Great constructed to expand the platform on which the temple stood.
God damn it.
The temple building proper.
Fucking Christ.
The sanctuary. The inner courts. All of it is gone. In that sense, the destruction was real and massive and undeniable, but not one stone will be left upon another, is a very specific formulation. And a retaining wall, several stories high, stretching hundreds of feet, with courses of massive stones fitted together with extraordinary craftsmanship, has stood continuously since the 1st century. Whether the saying is qualified by that fact depends entirely on what these great buildings was pointing at. The temple building alone, or the entire temple complex, including its foundations and supporting structures, a presentation that cites the temple's destruction without mentioning what is still standing is not giving the complete picture. Now, the second case in this section, different in character. Matthew chapter 12, verses 39 and 40. Jesus is responding to a demand for a sign. He says, "No sign will be given except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea creature, so for 3 days and 3 nights the Son of Man will be in the heart of the earth." 3 days and 3 nights. A specific formulation. And Matthew is the only synoptic writer who uses it. Mark and Luke both refer to Jesus rising on the 3rd day, or after 3 days. Neither of them adds 3 days and 3 nights. That specific phrase exists only in Matthew, only here, and Matthew's own gospel, in 3 other places, uses the simpler formulation. Chapter 16, verse 21, chapter 17, verse 23, chapter 20, verse 19. All 3 say on the 3rd day. The phrase 3 days and 3 nights appears once, here in chapter 12. In the explicit parallel to Jonah, this is not primarily an arithmetical problem. Reading 3 days and 3 nights through modern expectations of precise timekeeping and applying it to a death on Friday afternoon and a resurrection on Sunday morning produces a gap of roughly 36 to 40 hours, not 72. But the ancient Jewish idiom for counting time did not work the way modern timekeeping works. A part of a day could count as a full day. This is a genuine feature of how time was reckoned in that cultural context, not a rationalization invented to solve a problem. The real question is not the arithmetic. It is what Matthew was doing. Matthew was reaching for a scriptural image that would give the resurrection story the weight of the tradition behind it. Jonah in the belly of the creature was a powerful inherited image. 3 days and 3 nights was the specific language of that story. Matthew used it because his audience would recognize it. Because the parallel carried theological force. Because making the connection explicit served what he was trying to accomplish as a writer, addressing his community. That is a legitimate thing for a writer to do. It is also something that creates a measurable tension with the more precise expectation the specific language generates in a reader who takes it literally. The tension is worth naming, not because it proves Matthew wrong, but because it is evidence of something real about how these texts were made. Matthew was shaping the tradition he received. He was a theologian using a text, reaching for its resonance and its weight, not simply transcribing a statement. Placing him accurately as a writer is what allows the text to speak honestly. leave the ancient world for a moment. Not permanently. Just long enough to walk into a specific kind of room. A room that exists in every hospital, in every city, where Christianity has been present for the past 2,000 years. The person in the bed has been sick for a long time. The people sitting around the bed have been praying for a long time. They have prayed with faith. They have prayed specifically. They have prayed in the name of Jesus, because they were told by people they trusted, by communities that formed them, by texts they have read and heard read for as long as they can remember, that whatever they asked for in that name would be done. The person in the bed does not recover. This case is different from the ones before it. The previous cases were about eschatology, about what Jesus expected to happen in history and when. This case is about something that lives closer to the surface of ordinary life. A promise that sits at the center of lived religious experience for hundreds of millions of people. A promise that most people who grew up in a Christian context heard long before they were old enough to evaluate it. A promise that, when it appears not to be kept, produces one of two responses almost every time. Either the person who prayed questions their own faith, or they are told they did not pray correctly. Both of those responses say something about how the promise has been presented. That is what this case is about. Mark chapter 11, verse 24. Whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. Matthew chapter 21. Verse 22. Whatever you ask for in prayer with faith, you will receive. John chapter 14, verse 13. Whatever you ask in my name, I will do it, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. John chapter 14, verse 14. If you ask me anything in my name, I will do it. These are not obscure passages. They are among the most quoted, most preached, most repeated sentences in the New Testament. They are the foundation of an entire theology of prayer that has shaped how hundreds of millions of people understand their relationship with God across 2 millennia. And they say something very specific. Whatever. Anything. Ask, and it will be done. Now, the full tradition is more complex than the sentences most frequently quoted from it, and that complexity deserves to be laid out before the critique begins, not after, because laying it out after is part of what this case is examining. In John chapter 15, verse 7, Jesus says, "If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you." The condition is not just asking, it is abiding. Remaining in a relationship defined by mutual indwelling, by the words of Jesus shaping the interior life of the person praying. In the first letter of John, chapter 5, verse 14, the writer says, "If we ask anything according to his will, he hears us." According to his will, that qualifier locates the effectiveness of prayer not in the strength or sincerity of the request, but in its alignment with what God already intends. In the letter of James, chapter 4, verse 3, the writer says, "When you ask, you do not receive, because you ask with wrong motives?" Wrong motives as a condition of failure, built into the same tradition that carries the promise. These qualifiers are real. They exist in the same body of writing as the unqualified promises. They are not footnotes added later to soften an awkward claim. They are the tradition's own internal complexity on this question, and a complete and honest presentation of what the tradition actually says about prayer includes them from the beginning. So the framing of this case is not this. Jesus promised that prayer always works, and it does not always work. Therefore, the promise failed. That framing applies a simple cause and effect model to a theological claim the tradition itself does not present in those terms. The full framework is richer and more serious than that. But here is where a second step of honesty becomes unavoidable. The qualifiers exist in the tradition. They are not in the most quoted sentences. John chapter 14. Verse 13 does not say, "Whatever you ask in my name, according to his will." It says, "Whatever you ask in my name." The fuller context exists in the same body of writing. It requires knowing more of the text than the sentences most commonly quoted from it contain. And the most quoted version of the promise is consistently the version without the qualifiers. That gap matters. Not because it proves the promise is false, but because of what happens when the unqualified version is the one given at the beginning, and the qualifiers arrive only when the promise appears not to have worked. The person in that hospital room was not given the full framework first. They were given "whatever you ask. It will be done." They prayed accordingly. When the outcome was not what they prayed for, the qualifiers arrived. You were not truly abiding. Your motives were not right. It was not according to God's will. The problem was with the prayer, not with the promise. That sequence, promise first, in its simplest form. Qualifiers after failure is not deliberate deception, but it is a way of presenting a theological claim that consistently places the burden of unfulfilled expectation on the person who was expecting, rather than on the complexity of the claim itself. And there are people who have carried that burden. In rooms exactly like the one described at the beginning of this section, who were carrying something the full tradition did not require them to carry alone. Many believers have found genuine and lasting comfort in precisely this framework. The problem is not that the framework exists. The problem is when people are given only the promise before suffering arrives, and only the conditions after it does. The full framework, presented honestly from the beginning, is a different thing entirely from a guarantee issued before the crisis and an explanation issued after it. What the full tradition actually offers is something richer than the simplified version most people receive. It offers a relationship, not a mechanism. "In my name" is not a password or a formula. In the theological world of the Gospel of John, it describes something closer to alignment. Alignment with who Jesus is, what he wants, and what he is already doing in the world. A prayer genuinely in that alignment is, by the tradition's own account, a prayer participating in something already moving. The question is not whether God responds to a request submitted with correct wording. The question is whether the person praying is close enough to the source to be asking what the source is already giving. That is a serious and coherent theological position. Its depth deserves to be acknowledged. It is also a position that transforms the promise from something verifiable by individual outcomes into something visible only across the whole arc of a life lived in that kind of relationship, which means it cannot be tested the way a weather forecast can be tested, which means the people who were told it worked like a weather forecast were not given the tradition. They were given a simplification of the tradition that could not survive contact with the hardest rooms. The text is still there. "Whatever you ask in my name, I will do it." It has been there for nearly 2,000 years. The question this case leaves open is not whether the promise is true. The question is whether the way it has most commonly been presented has been as honest as the people receiving it in their most difficult moments deserved. Start with what the oldest manuscripts actually show, the Gospel of Mark. In the two oldest complete manuscripts of the New Testament that survive, ends with 3 women running away from an empty tomb in silence and fear. No risen Jesus appearing to anyone. No commission to go into all the world. No list of signs that would follow believers. Just 3 women. Just silence. Just fear. and a story that stops before it feels finished. That is where the oldest recoverable form of Mark stops, Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus, both dating to the middle of the 4th century. Both among the most carefully studied documents in the history of biblical scholarship. Both of them end Mark at chapter 16, verse 8. The longer ending, verses 9 through 20, which contains the passage this section examines, is absent from both of them. This was not a discovery made by modern critics looking for problems. Eusebius of Caesarea, writing in the early 4th century, acknowledged that the longer ending was absent from nearly all manuscripts he had access to. Jerome, writing around the same time, made the same observation. The question of where Mark actually ends was visible to careful readers in the earliest centuries of the tradition itself. It was noted, it was discussed, and then, as the longer ending became standard in the manuscripts most people read, the question largely disappeared from view. Bruce Metzger, whose textual commentary on the Greek New Testament remains one of the standard references in the field of textual criticism, examined the longer ending in detail. The vocabulary is different from the rest of Mark. The style is different. The way scenes connect is different. Everything about verses 9 through 20 points toward a different hand, writing at a later time, adding to a text that did not originally contain what they were adding. There is also a shorter alternate ending that appears in some manuscripts. A single sentence describing the disciples briefly, reporting what they had been told. Neither the shorter nor the longer ending is considered original to Mark by the majority of scholars in the field of New Testament textual criticism. This is the mainstream position in the field. It is reflected in the footnotes and section headers of most major Bible translations currently available. It is not a fringe conclusion. Now the passage. Mark chapter 16, verses 17 and 18. And these signs will accompany those who believe. In my name they will cast out demons. They will speak in new tongues. They will pick up snakes with their hands. And if they drink any deadly thing, it will not hurt them. They will lay their hands on the sick, and the sick will recover. This video does not encourage, demonstrate, or romanticize snake handling, poison drinking, or any dangerous religious practice. These examples are discussed here only as matters of textual history and reception history, meaning the documented history of how communities have read and applied this text across time.
God damn it.
The language of the passage strongly invites a concrete reading before any symbolic reading is introduced. It is specific enough that symbolic readings have to explain why the concrete sense should not control the passage. Cast out demons, speak in new tongues, pick up snakes, drink poison without harm, heal the sick by touch. These are not general assurances of divine presence. They are actions with observable outcomes. Most communities that have inherited this passage have read it in one of two ways. Either the signs applied specifically to the apostolic era and were not intended to continue indefinitely, or the signs are permanent promises available to all believers at all times. A small number of communities, concentrated primarily in the Appalachian region of the United States, have taken the snake handling and poison drinking elements with complete literalism. People have died in these communities as a result. Their existence is not an argument against the passage. It is data about what happens when the passage is read with complete internal consistency by people who take the text seriously enough to stake their lives on it. Both major readings share one assumption. They assume the passage is genuine, that it belongs in the Gospel of Mark and accurately represents the teaching of Jesus. The manuscript evidence points in a different direction, so the question shifts entirely. The question is no longer why these signs have not been more consistently visible in the history of the Church. That question assumes the passage is original and looks for an explanation of the gap between the promise and the record. The new question is this: who added these verses? And why? The most plausible answer, based on what the evidence shows, is that at some point in the late 1st or early 2nd century, a community felt that Mark ended too abruptly. Mark, chapter 16. Verse 8 is one of the most startling endings in ancient literature. The women flee the empty tomb. They say nothing to anyone. They are afraid. For a community that had experienced the resurrection as the center of everything, an ending that stopped at silence and fear was genuinely insufficient.
Now fuck up and
the story needed completing. The story needed what felt to them like its proper ending. So someone wrote more. Someone added resurrection appearances. Someone added a commission. And someone added a list of signs that would follow believers into the world. This was not an act of deliberate fraud in the modern sense. It was an act of faith by a community giving the story the ending they believed the story required, drawing on traditions that circulated in their world, filling a gap they experienced as real and significant. Whether they were right to feel the gap was real, whether the original ending was always meant to carry the weight it carries, is a separate question. What the evidence shows is that the filling happened. The filling became part of the text, and the text carried that addition forward for nearly 2,000 years. Now, a detail that deserves more than footnote treatment. Eusebius, drawing on the earlier writer Papias, records a tradition about a man named Justus Barsabbas, who appears in the Acts of the Apostles as one of 2 candidates considered to replace Judas among the 12. The tradition preserved through Papias, and then through Eusebius, is that Justus Barsabbas drank poison and was not harmed. This is offered as an instance of the promise in Mark 16 being enacted in a real person's life. It is the earliest recorded attempt to document a case of the poison drinking sign. 2 things need to be said about this tradition with equal weight. First, it exists only through the chain from Papias to Eusebius. There is no independent confirmation from any other source. Second, the relationship between this tradition and the longer ending of Mark is genuinely unclear in terms of which came first. Communities that believed such things were possible gathered stories of such things happening. Stories of such things happening reinforced the belief that they were possible. Whether the longer ending was added partly because such stories were circulating, or whether such stories were gathered partly because the longer ending provided a framework for them, cannot be determined from the evidence available. What is clear is that communities were doing what communities do when they need to demonstrate that what they believe is real. They gathered testimony.
Christ.
They named cases.
Oh, goddamn Christ.
They pointed to people they could identify. That is not dishonesty. It is faith building a case for itself, which is something every religious tradition does in some form. The question worth sitting with is not whether the communities were sincere. They almost certainly were. The question is what it means for the signs passage in Mark 16 that the passage itself was almost certainly added by someone other than the original author, drawing on traditions that cannot be independently confirmed, to give a necessary ending to a gospel that felt unfinished without one. The promises are in the text. They have been there for nearly 2,000 years. Communities have organized their lives around them. Some have died because of them. And the history of how those promises came to be in the text is itself a document about what communities do when a story does not give them what they feel the story requires. That history is part of the text, too. It always was. Everything in this video has been building here, not because this is the most dramatic case, But because this is the case where the problem is not in a gospel written decades after the events it describes, this is the case where the problem is in the oldest surviving written document in the entire New Testament, a letter that predates every gospel in its final form, written by the person who did more than anyone else to shape what Christianity became, and a letter in which that person places himself, in his own voice and his own name, inside the expectation that history did not fulfill. That letter comes second. A gospel case comes first. Matthew chapter 10, verse 23. Jesus has just sent out the 12 disciples on a specific mission. Go to the towns of Israel, not the whole world, not the ends of the earth. A specific territory with a specific population. A journey that could, in principle, be completed in a matter of weeks. Jesus tells them what to do when they face persecution in one town. Flee to the next. And then this. Truly I tell you,
dumbass,
you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. This is not a statement about a distant future. It is attached to a specific journey, through a specific territory, assigned to 12 specific people. The framing is tight. The geography is limited. The implication is that the Son of Man will come before those 12 people finish walking through the towns of Israel. The synoptic narrative moves on. The disciples continue in the story. History was not interrupted in the way the most natural reading of the saying would lead a careful reader to expect. Albert Schweitzer, read Matthew 10, verse 23. As the key to everything, in his interpretation, which not all scholars share, and which deserves to be named as interpretation, Jesus sent the 12 out with the genuine expectation that the world would be transformed before they returned. History would be interrupted before the task was complete. When the disciples returned, and history had not been interrupted, something shifted in Jesus. If the kingdom was not going to arrive through the mission of the 12, perhaps something more radical was required. And in Schweitzer's reading, that calculation took Jesus toward Jerusalem. Nicholas Thomas Wright reads the passage through his larger framework. The Son of Man coming is language from Daniel chapter 7 about vindication, about the confirmation of God's purposes after historical crisis. The disciples' mission was part of a larger process pointing toward the events of the year 70 of the Common Era. The language describes the vindication of Jesus visible in those events, not the literal interruption of a short Galilean journey. Two serious readings. Two different pictures of what Jesus expected. No reading of Matthew 10, verse 23. That does not carry a real cost. Now the letter. Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians is the earliest document in the New Testament. Scholars date it to around the year 50 of the Common Era. That is roughly 20 years after the crucifixion. At least 15 years before any gospel reached its final form. Whatever Paul wrote in this letter is the oldest surviving written testimony from inside the Christian tradition. In chapter 4, verses 15 through 17, Paul addresses a specific pastoral problem. Some members of the community in Thessalonica have died. The people still living are grieving and worried. They want to know whether the members who died will miss out on what is coming. Paul reassures them. And in the middle of that reassurance, in his own voice, he says this, "For this we declare to you by a word from the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will not precede those who have fallen asleep. We who are alive, we who are left until the coming of the Lord." The most natural reading of that phrasing is that Paul appears to have expected, or at minimum, treated as urgently possible within the horizon of his own living community, that he and his companions might be among those still alive when the parousia came. He does not say those of you who happen to be alive. He says, we who are alive. He places himself in the group that is waiting. Paul was executed in Rome, most likely around the year 64 or 65 of the Common Era. He did not live to see what he was describing. The community in Thessalonica that was grieving for its dead eventually had more dead to grieve. Generation after generation of people who expected to be alive for the return were not. The tradition has offered two serious responses to this passage. Both deserve honest presentation. The first is that Paul was using we in a general and inclusive sense.
Amen.
Meaning we, believers, as a group, whoever among us happens to be alive at that time. On this reading, Paul was not claiming personal certainty about whether he would survive until the Parousia. He was describing two categories of people, those alive and those who had died, and saying both would participate in what was coming. The we is theological, not autobiographical. That reading is grammatically possible. Its cost is that the we in verse 15 functions most naturally as the same we Paul uses throughout the letter to refer to himself and his companions, in contrast to the you that refers to his audience in Thessalonica, reading it as general and inclusive, specifically in this verse, while reading it as personal and specific everywhere else in the same letter, requires a choice. The grammar alone does not force. The second response draws on a framework like rights. Paul's apocalyptic language should not be read as simple sky report literalism, a figure descending physically from above. Paul's own eschatology is complex, and it includes dimensions of vindication, divine presence, and historical judgment that do not map neatly onto later expectations of a visible return. This is an important point. Paul's eschatology is genuinely complex enough that it resists being collapsed into any single reading, including readings that locate the fulfillment entirely in the year 70 events. Both responses are serious. Both carry costs. And neither changes the central observation. The oldest document in the New Testament was written by someone who appears to have oriented himself and his community toward an event he expected, or at least treated as urgently possible. Described himself as potentially among those alive to see it, and did not live to see it arrive. That is an observation about what Paul wrote. In his own name, in the oldest text we have, now the document that proves the pressure was real, from inside the tradition itself. The second letter of Peter opens a window into a community under a specific kind of strain, not persecution from outside, a question being asked by people inside the community. The question is in chapter 3, verse 4. Where is the promise of his coming? For ever since the fathers fell asleep, all things are continuing as they were from the beginning of creation. That is the question of people who expected something and have watched years pass without it arriving. That is the question of communities told the coming was imminent, who have now outlived the generation that first heard it described that way. The dating of 2 Peter is debated. Many critical scholars place it in the late 1st century or the early 2nd century of the Common Era, which would make it one of the latest documents in the New Testament. The majority position in critical scholarship is that it was written after Peter's death, by someone writing in his name. Pseudonymous writing in the ancient world was a practice whose meaning and ethical status are debated by scholars, and which does not map neatly onto modern categories of forgery. This context matters for how the document is understood, without resolving every question about its authority, whatever its precise date. What 2 Peter chapter 3 is doing is unmistakable. Verse 8 offers a refrain. With the Lord, one day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like one day. Verse 9 offers a reinterpretation. The Lord is not slow to fulfill his promise, as some count slowness,
God damn it.
but is patient toward you. Those are not the words of a community for whom the question of delay is theoretical. They are the words of a community living inside the delay,
dick.
addressing people who have noticed it and are asking about it out loud. The question being answered in Chapter 3 is evidence that the question was real. The pressure was felt. The distance between expectation and experience was significant enough that a document was written specifically to address it. And the response that document offers is to permanently reframe the relationship between divine time and human time. Once 1,000 years and a single day are equivalent from a divine perspective. No amount of waiting can constitute evidence against the promise. The expectation becomes immune to any time frame a human observer could use to evaluate it. Whether that reframing represents wisdom or necessity, or both simultaneously, depends on what you bring to it. What is not a matter of interpretation is this. The question was being asked, inside the community, urgently enough to require a written response. And the response, preserved in the canon, is the clearest evidence in the entire New Testament that communities of the earliest centuries felt the weight of the distance between what they had been told to expect and what they were experiencing. The tradition carried that evidence forward intact. In the same collection of texts that carried everything else, picture a courtroom, not a modern one with cameras and procedural rules. Something older and more spare. A room where three people who have spent their entire working lives studying the same texts sit down, one at a time, and say what they actually think. Not what is safe, not what their institution expects, what the evidence. Read as carefully as they know how to read it. Actually shows. The question before the court is specific. 8 cases, 8 sayings and traditions attributed to Jesus, or preserved by the earliest Christian texts. Some are sayings attributed directly to Jesus. One is a promise preserved in what textual scholars consider a later addition to Mark. One is a passage from the oldest letter in the New Testament, written by someone who placed himself inside the same expectation this video has been examining. What do you make of all of it? Bart Ehrman goes first. He spent decades teaching New Testament at the University of North Carolina, training students who went into ministry, into academia, into lives shaped by these texts. He knows the tradition from the inside. He was a committed evangelical before the questions he could not stop asking took him somewhere else. The shift cost him something real. He has never pretended otherwise. His argument does not begin with a conclusion. It begins with a pattern. Mark 9, verse 1. Mark 13, verse 30. Matthew 10, verse 23. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. These are not isolated passages discovered by critics looking for ammunition. They are central texts in the tradition, preserved by the tradition. Sitting in plain sight in documents, the tradition has always considered authoritative, and they form a pattern entirely consistent with what scholars of ancient Judaism have documented extensively about first-century apocalyptic expectation. The belief that God was about to intervene in history, decisively and soon, was not unique to Jesus. It was the defining feature of the world he inhabited. John the Baptist preached it. The community at Qumran that produced the Dead Sea Scrolls organized their entire common life around it. Multiple Jewish groups in the first century were living inside the conviction that the end of the present age was close enough to shape every decision they made. Jesus, in Ehrman's reading, was formed by that world. He shared its fundamental expectation, gave it a moral and spiritual depth that set him apart, proclaimed it with an urgency that drew people from ordinary lives to follow him. But the expectation itself, that the kingdom was arriving soon, that some standing there would not taste death before it came with power, that the generation currently alive would see all of it. That expectation was one he shared with the tradition he inherited. It did not arrive in the form he described. The crowd aged and died. Paul appears to have expected to be among those alive for the return, and was not. The community in Thessalonica asked where the promise was, and needed a letter to address the question. 2 Peter reframed the relationship between divine time and human time, which only makes sense as a response to a problem of elapsed time that was being felt as real and urgent by real communities. Ehrman does not say, this makes Jesus a fraud. He says it makes Jesus human. And he says the handling of the delay across 2,000 years, the relocation of fulfillments, and the reframing of expectations, and the spiritualizing of what had been concrete. It deserves a kind of honesty it has not always received in many public forms of the tradition. His book, Jesus, Apocalyptic Prophet of the New Millennium, published in 1999, makes this argument in full. He finishes, "The room is quiet. Nicholas Thomas Wright stands up. He has been waiting. He has read everything Ehrman has read, and a great deal more. His book, Jesus and the Victory of God, published in 1996, is nearly 900 pages long. He did not write 900 pages because he thought the question was easy or the evidence was simple. His argument begins not with the conclusions, but with the language. The problem with Ehrman's reading, Wright says, is not the evidence. The evidence is real. The problem is what Ehrman is doing with the language before he even reaches the evidence. He is reading first-century Jewish apocalyptic imagery the way a 21st century reader reads a news report, literally, as though the sun being darkened and the stars falling and the Son of Man coming on clouds were predictions about things that would be physically observable to anyone present. That is not how this language works. It never was. Isaiah used identical imagery to describe the fall of Babylon. The sun darkened. The moon gave no light. The stars fell. Babylon fell. Nobody stood outside watching the sky. The language was doing something different. It was giving cosmic weight to a historical event.
Whoa. Wait a minute.
In the vocabulary the tradition had developed for exactly this purpose. That the structure of the world is being reorganized at the level that counts most. Jesus was using that same vocabulary to describe what was coming to Jerusalem. The destruction of the temple and the city in the year 70 of the Common Era was the judgment he was pointing toward, the vindication of everything he had proclaimed. People in the generation he addressed did live to see it. Some standing there did not taste death before the kingdom of God came with power, if what that phrase means is what Wright argues it means. The historical vindication of Jesus visible in the collapse of the system that had opposed him. Wright does not erase all future hope from Christian theology. He is careful and explicit about this. He relocates these specific sayings, the ones this video has examined, away from a future end-of-world scenario and into the first-century crisis of Jerusalem. Paul's eschatology is complex enough that it does not collapse neatly into the year 70 reading either. And Wright acknowledges that complexity, even as he argues that the apocalyptic language of the Gospels is being systematically misread by those who take it as literal sky description. The cost of this reading, Wright acknowledges, is real. It requires a consistent application of the symbolic reading to language that most Christians across most of history have understood differently. That is not a reason to abandon the reading. It is a reason to hold it carefully and to present it as a reading, which is what Wright has spent his career doing. He sits down. Raymond Brown does not stand up. He died in 1998, but his decades of work are on the table. John Mayer's work is there too. 4 volumes of A Marginal Jew, the most exhaustive attempt in modern scholarship to reconstruct what the historical Jesus actually said, held throughout with the kind of patience that neither of the other 2 positions has always found possible to maintain. Their position, stated with the care they would want applied to it, is this: both of you are more confident than the evidence supports. The texts in this room are not transcripts. They are the products of communities. Communities that received traditions about Jesus, shaped them in light of their own experiences and needs, and passed them forward in the forms that served their communities best. The distance between what Jesus said in Galilee in the early 1st century and what appears in documents written 1 to 7 decades later is a distance filled with memory, liturgical use, theological reflection, and editorial decisions made by people whose names we do not know. This does not mean the tradition is unreliable in some wholesale sense. It means the question of what Jesus actually said is almost always more complicated than either side of this debate is willing to acknowledge. Ehrman tends toward confidence that the apocalyptic readings reflect what Jesus meant. Wright tends toward confidence that his symbolic readings reflect what Jesus meant. Both tend toward more certainty than the actual state of the evidence can support. The honest position requires sitting with uncertainty that neither confident criticism nor confident apologetics finds comfortable. It requires acknowledging that we are reading communities as much as we are reading Jesus, and that what those communities believed and how they shaped what they received is itself evidence of something real, even when it cannot tell us with certainty what Jesus said or expected. The room is quiet after that. Now the thing all 3 positions share underneath their disagreements. None of them pretends the tension is not there. Ehrman does not explain it away. Wright does not pretend his reading is costless. Brown and Meyer do not dissolve it into pure uncertainty. The tension is real. Each framework addresses it with genuine seriousness. And no one in this room, with the full weight of the evidence and the scholarship in front of them, can honestly say the matter is closed. What has been established is this: the texts are in the tradition. They have always been there. Every generation of careful readers has had access to them, and the handling of them, at its best, has been an honest engagement with genuine difficulty. At other times, it has been the presentation of one reading as the reading, without naming the cost of that reading or acknowledging that others exist. That is not a verdict on Christianity. The tradition contains far more honest wrestling with its own difficult texts than any summary can represent. But many public forms of the tradition, the sermons and the Sunday school classes and the devotional literature that reaches most people, have not always shown their work. Showing your work is what this room is for. The verdict is not delivered here, but the testimony has been heard. There is something underneath all 8 cases in this video that has nothing specifically to do with theology. It has to do with how human beings handle the gap between what they expect and what they experience. And once you see it operating in this tradition, you recognize it everywhere. In every domain where people have organized their lives around beliefs that matter to them deeply enough to stake something real on. In 1956, a social psychologist named Leon Festinger published a study called When Prophecy Fails. He and his colleagues spent months embedded in a small group in the American Midwest that believed the world would end on a specific date, in December of 1954. A flying saucer would arrive to carry believers to safety before the catastrophe. The date came. The saucer did not. The world continued exactly as before. Festinger watched what happened next. Most members of the group did not leave. They did not say they had been wrong and return quietly to their previous lives. Most of them became more committed, not less. They began seeking converts with an urgency they had never shown before the failure. They reinterpreted what had occurred. One of the leaders received what she described as a divine message, explaining that the faith of their small group had caused God to spare the world. The failure became, inside the community, evidence of their importance. The disconfirmation became a form of confirmation. Festinger called the mechanism cognitive dissonance reduction. When a deeply held belief is contradicted by clear evidence, the mind does not always update the belief. Sometimes it updates the interpretation of the evidence instead. And in a group setting, with social bonds and shared investment in the belief, the reinterpretation is reinforced by the community around you. The group becomes the reality check that confirms the new reading rather than challenging it. This comparison must be made carefully, and that care is not a disclaimer inserted to soften what comes next. It is an accurate description of the limits of the comparison. Saying that the early Christian community navigated the delay of the parousia using mechanisms that resemble what Festinger documented is not the same as saying that Christianity is equivalent to a small Midwestern group waiting for a flying saucer in 1954. The scale of the two situations is not comparable. The historical depth is not comparable. The intellectual and spiritual resources the Christian tradition has brought to its own difficult questions across 20 centuries are not comparable. The moral vision at the center of the tradition is not comparable. The effect of the tradition on the history of human civilization is not comparable. What the comparison illuminates is not the size or significance of the two cases. It illuminates the mechanism. The basic psychological situation at the level Festinger was studying, a community forming around an expectation. The expectation not arriving on the anticipated timeline. The community deciding what to do with the distance is present in both cases. The mechanism does not require the cases to be equal in significance. It only requires the basic situation to be present. And the basic situation was genuinely present in first century Christianity. The investment was total. People had left families, given up property, accepted social exclusion, and in some cases, death, in light of what they believed was coming. The social environment of the early communities was intensely reinforcing, and the evidence of non-arrival, the non-arrival of the expected kingdom, in the expected form on any anticipated timeline, was genuinely ambiguous. The year 70 events were real and dramatic. The growth of the movement across the empire was real. The experiences people reported in their communities were real and transformative to those who had them. A community could, with complete sincerity, read these things as confirmation rather than disconfirmation. Now, here is what most discussions that invoke Festinger in connection with religious history leave out. And this is the part that changes the picture most significantly. The mechanism Festinger documented is not only a story about self-deception, it is also, sometimes, the mechanism by which things worth preserving survive conditions that would otherwise destroy them. A community that dissolves the moment its initial expectations are not confirmed is a community that never develops the depth that comes from sustained engagement with difficulty. The Jewish tradition survived the destruction of the temple, not once, but twice, through exactly this kind of sustained reinterpretation. It did not survive by being right about its initial expectations. It survived by being willing to engage honestly and creatively with the gap between expectation and reality, finding new ways of understanding that preserved what mattered while releasing what could not be held. Christianity did something similar. The early community's handling of the delayed parousia was not only a psychological response, it was also the process by which a tradition developed the theological resources to mean something to people living decades and centuries and millennia after the initial events. The reinterpretation was, in some deep sense, the tradition becoming what it needed to become in order to survive and to speak to more than one generation. That does not resolve whether the reinterpretation was always honest about what it was doing. It does not settle whether carrying the fulfillment to the year 70 events is a legitimate reading of some standing here will not taste death, or a necessary adjustment to a situation that required adjustment. Those questions remain genuinely open. The honest engagement with them has to stay open. But it does mean the pattern festing or documented is not only a story about failure or motivated reasoning, it is also, sometimes, a story about resilience, about communities, finding ways to carry forward something they believed was true through conditions that made carrying it hard. The question worth sitting with at the end of this section is not whether the early Christian community was naive. The question is whether the tradition built on that process of reinterpretation has distinguished in its most public-facing forms. Between here is what we expected, and here is what we found, and here is how we have chosen to read the distance between them. The places where that distinction has been made clearly are among the most interesting places in 2,000 years of Christian thought. The places where it has not been made, where the reinterpretation has been presented as the original meaning, are the places where the conversation gets harder. 8 cases, 1 pattern, running through all of them. Not a pattern of deliberate deception, a pattern of human communities doing what human communities do when they are trying to hold something precious through conditions that put it under pressure. Recognizing that pattern is not the same as dismissing what is being held. It is the honest precondition for understanding it. Go back to the beginning. Mark, chapter 9, verse 1. A crowd on a hillside in Galilee. A man speaking to people who had walked away from ordinary lives to hear him. A sentence that nobody in that crowd could have known would still be sitting in a text 2,000 years later. Examined by people who would spend entire careers trying to understand what it meant. Truly, I tell you.
Suck my dick, bitch.
Some who are standing here will not taste death before they see that the kingdom of God has come with power. Every person in that crowd is gone. Everyone who heard those words and turned to the person beside them, everyone who walked home that evening trying to find the language to describe what it had felt like to be there, all of them gone. The hillside is still there. The words are still there. Stay with that for a moment before the summary begins. Not what the words mean. Not whether they were fulfilled. Just the fact that they survived. That someone thought them important enough to remember in a world with no recording devices. That a community thought them important enough to write down when writing materials were expensive and scarce, and survival was not guaranteed. That what was written survived.
You suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. You suck my motherfucking dick.
If I told you that God commands us not to help certain kinds of people, would you believe it?
I'd say you suck my dick,
It almost sounds
bitch.
wrong to say that. We're constantly told that Christians must help everyone, say yes to every request, and never refuse anyone in need. But when you actually read the Bible carefully, you discover something surprising. God does not approve of every kind of help. In fact, there are certain types of people that, when you help them, you're actually disobeying the Lord, and you may even be putting your own life at risk. Stay in this video until the end, because I'm going to show you exactly who these people are. First kind of person you should not help, the manipulator. Proverbs 12:22 states clearly, "Lying lips are abomination to the Lord, but they that deal truly are his delight." Look at the word God uses, abomination. In other words, manipulation is not just a personality trait, not just the way they are, much less emotional neediness. It is sin. God does not look at lies with pity. He looks at them with disgust. And when you support someone who lives in this game of deception, Even without realizing it, you are not helping. You are sponsoring their sin. And do you know the mistake most Christians make here? Thinking that loving someone means saying yes to everything. That we are obligated to fix everyone's problems. But that idea is wrong, because Jesus didn't do that. There was a time when a man came to him and said, "Master, speak to my brother, that he divide the inheritance with me." And how did Jesus reply? "Man, who made me a judge or a divider over you?" In other words, Jesus refused to get involved in that issue. Jesus did not allow people to place him in roles that were not his. He knew exactly when to help, and when to say, "That's not mine to handle." He would not let himself be manipulated by a greedy man. So understand this once and for all. If someone only remembers you when they need something, if they constantly back you into a corner with phrases like, "If you were a real Christian, you'd do this for me," if they make you feel guilty for protecting your peace or your boundaries, that is not a cry for help. That is manipulation. And helping a manipulator does not set anyone free. It only strengthens their control over you. That's why sometimes the most biblical response you can have is not to extend your hand, but to cut off access. Love is not saying yes to blackmail. Love is saying, "I'm here for you, but I will not play your game." Now, I need to talk about a kind of person that many Christians support, thinking they're doing charity, when in reality, they're getting in the way of what God wants to teach, the lazy. And I'm not talking about someone going through a hard time, struggling with unemployment, trying to rebuild their life. That kind of person deserves help, encouragement, prayer, and support. The problem is the one who never takes a step, yet wants life to move forward by itself. They're always asking for prayer, but never bend their own knees. Always asking for help, but never lift a finger to help themselves. On this, Paul says in 2 Thessalonians 3:10, "For even when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if any would not work, neither should he eat." Pay attention to the wording. Would not could not. The difference is massive. Some people suffer because of things they cannot change, but others suffer because they chose not to make an effort. And what happens? You step in and help. You fix the situation. The person feels relieved, and you think, now they'll change, but they don't. The following week they're back, and you help again. Then they're back, and you help again. Until one day you realize the person isn't trapped in hardship. They're comfortable in the dependency you built. And Paul continues saying, "There were some which walk among you disorderly, working not at all, but are busybodies." In other words, the lazy has no energy to work, but has plenty of time to gossip. The apostle is making it clear. If someone does not occupy themselves with what they should, they will end up occupied with what they shouldn't. So if you're carrying someone who refuses to walk, stop helping. Not to abandon them, but to let God do what you've been preventing. Sometimes the fall you keep rescuing them from is exactly the push God wants to use to wake them up, so they can finally overcome laziness. Another kind of person you should not help is the repeat fool. This one is a specialist in draining your patience, because unlike the lazy, he seems like he wants help. He listens to advice, nods his head, agrees with every word you say. Sometimes he even cries. He says that this time it'll be different, and you believe it. But after a week, there he is again, in the same mistake, with the same speech, with the same empty promises. You pray for him, talk to him, give advice, send him Bible verses, sermons, videos, devotionals.
Promise. You make me. Promises.
He wants relief. He wants you to become his spiritual nursing home, where he can rest between one fall and the next, without ever having to truly decide to break away from what destroys him. The Bible describes this kind of person perfectly. Proverbs 26:11 says, "As a dog returneth to his vomit, so a fool returneth to his vomit." Strong? Yes. Disgusting? Also. But that is exactly what happens. Some people leave a terrible relationship, only to enter another just like it. They get out of debt and go right back to spending the same way. They ask for prayer over a sin, but change nothing in their routine to overcome that sin. They don't want deliverance. They want anesthesia. And then the question starts hammering in your head. Do I have to keep helping? And the biblical answer is, you help those who want to get out, not those who just want to rest between stumbles. Because if you keep rescuing them every time, you are no longer a helper. You've become a lifeguard for someone who likes to drown. The Bible is direct about this.
Who likes to drown?
9 says, "Speak not in the ears of a fool, for he will despise the wisdom of thy words." In other words, do not waste counsel on someone who doesn't want change, because your time is valuable, your energy is limited. And while you're trying to save someone who doesn't want to be saved, there is someone else beside you who does want to be transformed, but you don't see them, because you're too busy rescuing someone who turned foolishness into a lifestyle. If the fool wears you out by repetition, the proud wears you out by resistance. You show them the Bible. They argue. You give advice. They roll their eyes. You point out the danger. They respond saying they know what they're doing. And the most ironic part, sometimes this kind even comes asking for help, but on their terms. They want a solution, without admitting they were wrong. They want healing, without confessing they are sick. They want change, without humbling themselves. About this kind of person, James 4:6 says, "But he giveth more grace. Wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble." Look at that word, resisteth. God opposes. God stands against pride. Translation: if even God is not helping someone because they refuse to humble themselves and admit their need, who are you to try? And there's more. Proverbs 26:12 says, "Seest thou a man wise in his own conceit? There is more hope of a fool than of him." In other words, it's easier to convince a fool than a proud man, because the fool still knows he needs help. He may fall 1,000 times, but at some level, he recognizes he is lost. But the proud thinks he's right. He's not only in error, he is convinced his error is the right path. And someone who thinks they're fine will never seek change. And remember the rich young ruler? Jesus spoke truth in love, showed him the way, offered him the chance to follow him. The man heard it, understood it, but preferred to keep the status and pride that came with his wealth. He didn't just walk away sad. He walked away chained to his own pedestal. And what did Jesus do? Did he chase after him saying, "Wait, I take it back. I didn't mean it that strongly"? Jesus let him go. Because some people only learn when they lose. Another kind of person you should not help is the quarrelsome one. And I'm not talking about someone who defends the truth firmly. I'm talking about someone who creates conflict wherever they go. They fight at work, argue in traffic, stir trouble in the family, cause division in the church. They are never wrong. They are always the one being mistreated. And you, with your Christian heart, go there trying to be a peacemaker. You defend them, take their side, argue on their behalf, thinking you're being righteous. But as soon as one war ends, they're already in another, because they don't want peace. They want attention. Proverbs 19:19 speaks exactly about such a person. "A man of great wrath shall suffer punishment. For if thou deliver him, yet thou must do it again." In other words, if you put out the fire that he himself started, get ready to put out another tomorrow, because he will create another mess. That's why the Bible is stating clearly, do not help the quarrelsome one. Let him reap the fruit of his own chaos.
I gotta hear that again.
Because many times the discipline he needs, fire. For if thou deliver him, yet thou must do it again, and suffer punishment. For if thou deliver him, yet thou must do it again. In other words, if you put out the fire that he himself started, get ready to put out another tomorrow, because he will create another mess. That's why the Bible is stating clearly, do not help the quarrelsome one. Let him reap the fruit of his own chaos, because many times the discipline he needs does not come in the form of a hug. It comes in the form of consequence. And do you know what the danger is? If you keep rescuing him, you stop being a peacemaker and become an accomplice. You are not bringing peace, you are prolonging the chaos. Because as long as someone keeps bailing him out, he will never change. So understand, it is not a lack of love to let the quarrelsome person feel the weight of their own choices. Sometimes the best help is to step aside and let God deal with them. So, who are the 5 types of people the Bible says you should not help? First, the manipulator, who doesn't ask for help, but controls. Second, the lazy, who doesn't want change, only comfort. Third, the repeat fool, who keeps making the same mistakes and uses you as temporary relief. Fourth, the proud, who wants a solution without admitting fault. Fifth, the quarrelsome, who is always stirring conflict with everyone. And maybe now you have that question hammering in your mind. But if I stop helping, am I sinning? The answer is simple. It depends. If you are helping someone who truly wants change, keep going. The Bible commands us to carry one another's burdens. But if you are sustaining sin, feeding irresponsibility, or protecting someone God is trying to confront, then that is not love. It is disobedience. Now, if you want to go deeper in your Bible study, check out my exclusive resource, mind maps of all the books of the Bible, designed to make your learning easier and more effective. You'll also get bonus materials to take your Bible journey to the next level. Don't miss out. Click the link in the description to get instant access. And before you go, don't forget to watch the next video that's showing up on your screen. It's one you won't want to miss. Stay in peace, and see you next time.
The stupid machine! You dumbass cunt. You cunt. Suck my cunt. Suck my motherfucking dick, bitch. You suck my motherfucking dick. You suck my dick, bitch. Suck my motherfucking dick. You suck my goddamn dick, bitch. You suck my goddamn dick. Bitch, you suck my dick, bitch. Bitch, you suck my dick. Bitch, you suck my motherfucking dick. Bitch, you suck my motherfucking dick. Bitch, you suck my motherfucking dick. Go ahead, ampersand the fuck out of me, you son of a bitch. You stupid goddamn motherfucker. You stupid goddamn motherfucker. Goddamn son of a bitch. You suck my motherfucking dick. You suck my motherfucking dick. Suck my motherfucking dick. Suck my fucking dick. You suck my motherfucking dick. Suck my fucking dick. Bitch, you... Bitch, you suck my dick, bitch. Suck my motherfucking dick. Suck my dick. Suck my motherfucking dick. Suck my motherfucking dick. Bitch, you suck my dick, bitch. Suck my motherfucking dick. Bitch, you suck my motherfucking dick. Suck my fucking dick. Bitch, you suck my fucking dick. Suck my dick. Bitch, you suck my motherfucking dick. Bitch, you suck my motherfucking dick. Suck my dick. Suck my pussy. Suck my dick. You suck my motherfucking dick. Bitch, you suck my fucking dick. Suck my motherfucking dick, bitch. You suck my dick. Bitch, you suck my motherfucking dick. Bitch, you suck my dick, bitch. Bitch, you suck my motherfucking dick. Bitch, you suck my fucking dick. The fucking poems. Suck my... Bitch, you suck my motherfucking dick. Bitch, you suck my dick. Bitch, you suck my motherfucking dick. Bitch, you suck my dick. Bitch, you suck my dick. Bitch, you suck my dick. Stupid, you stupid motherfucker. Stupid, 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 stupid. You suck my goddamn motherfucking goddamn dick. You suck my goddamn dick. Bitch, you suck my dick. Bitch, you suck my motherfucking dick. Suck my fucking dick. Bitch, you suck my dick, bitch. Bitch, you suck my motherfucking dick. Suck my fucking dick. Suck my motherfucking dick. Suck my dick. March! 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 Dickhole. Whispering, no, 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 no. Kiss your that king goodbye, your ass goodbye, slut. I'm fixing to slut you up. Son of a bitch. Kiss that king goodbye. Spit, 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 spit. I fuck his ho! Spit, 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 spit. Man, I fucked his butt.